It is time to break out the leatherworking tools and make a custom leather knife sheath to fit a custom, handmade, custom-shaped knife. Knife not included. I'm Jeff. You're watching Home Built Workshop. Make sure you stick around. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Home Built Workshop. I hope your day is going awesome. Today, we're going to do a little bit of leather working. If you saw the video a little while back, you'll know that I made this knife out of an old table saw blade. Well, since then, I've made another knife. This one was done completely off camera and really just in some spare time in between some other things that I was working on. The style's a little bit different, but it's made in exactly the same way as I made this one. So if you want to see how this one was made, well, actually this one, you can go watch the video, and it's exactly the same process that I used to make this one. One of the challenges when making a custom knife is finding a sheath that actually fits it. You know, if you make it from scratch, the sky's the limit and you can make it any shape you want to make it. That's cool, but a lot of times off-the-shelf leather sheaths don't always fit your custom-shaped knife, and that's where we got to make a pattern. I'm going to start with just a regular sheet of paper, and I'm going to fold it in half to kind of make a center line that we can work off of. Now I'll lay my knife on the center line and I'll trace the outline. This will give us a shape to work off of. Now I'm going to use my ruler and I'm going to add about 5/16 of an inch around the blade. This dimension can vary a little bit, but I want to give myself plenty of room to get a nice stitch line around the outside edge of the sheath. Now that I have a rough idea of the outline of the sheath, now it's time to put on our thinking caps, have a little fun, use your imagination, and come up with the shape that you want to use for your sheath. Well, after using up a whole eraser, a lot of back and forth, I think I've got my pattern worked out. If you can see my pattern through all the erased lines, I was going back and forth on a lot of different ideas. I initially had a one-piece sheath in mind, but I think that's going to be a little tricky due to the curve on the spine of this knife. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to have a separate panel that'll be this outline here, and then it's going to come up here to kind of a strap that will fold over to create the belt loop. And then we have a smaller panel that'll be on the front, and that's where our snap will be, and then we'll put a little strap that comes around here that folds around and snaps here to secure the knife. We're going to have to make a welt in here because if you just stitch two pieces of leather together and then you insert a sharp knife, there's a pretty good chance, especially if your sheath fits snugly, that that sharp blade's going to cut right through your stitches. So I'm going to need to cut about, I think I've got a 5/16 inch wide space all the way around. We'll glue in a piece of leather, then we'll glue on the top panel, and then we can stitch through with an 1/8 inch stitch line along the outside. That'll give it plenty of room inside, I think, and it'll look nice as well. So now let's grab a sharp knife and start making some cuts. I want to cut out this pattern first. This is not the knife I'll be using. This is not sharpened yet. Kind of wait until we have something to protect the blade. And now, because I know I'm going to have to slice this into some smaller pieces, I'm going to transfer these as I go over to just some cardboard, old cereal boxes, stuff like that. Make great patterns. I always have something around that I can use for stuff like this. I'm not ever going to have to make another one of these, but I need to have multiple pieces when it comes time to lay these out on the leather. Now my initial outline is essentially the back panel of the sheath, so I'll trace that out first and cut it out of the cardboard. From there, I'll then cut the front panel from my piece of paper and cut that out of the cardboard, followed by the last section, which will be the welt. I'm basically taking my paper pattern and breaking it down as I transfer it to the cardboard. So there's our three pieces. We've got the back panel, the piece which will be the welt. And actually, let's make sure this fits in there. Yeah, that's going to be fine. And then the top piece. All we need to do now is to cut these exact shapes out of some leather. I'll probably leave this a little bit longer because I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to be folding this back, and I think it needs to be a little bit longer. I think the fold probably needs to be right about here. So that means this needs to be a couple inches longer. I'll do that when we cut it out of the leather, which is what I'm going to do right now. To transfer the pattern to the leather, I'll just scribe around the outside edge. Then using a sharp X-Acto knife, I can carefully cut the pieces out. With all the pieces cut out, now I want to take a minute and apply a little bit of dye to the inside areas. I'm not going to worry about dyeing the whole thing. I'll be able to do that later on, but right now, if I don't apply dye to the inside, I won't ever be able to get any in there, at least not very easily. So we'll quickly apply dye and actually have gloves to wear. Now, once this is together, there won't be any visible leather that doesn't have any dye on there. I think it just looks better overall. As soon as the dye is dry, I can break out the contact cement and glue these pieces together. I think my glue's getting dried out. It's getting really thick. Of course, I've had this can for quite some time. It's probably time for a new one. Once the contact cement has tacked up, I can carefully line up the pieces and stick them down. Once they're stuck in place, I'll tap them down to make sure we have a good glue joint. And now it's over to the belt grinder to sand the edges nice and flush. You don't have to use a belt grinder specifically, but any sort of a belt sander type of machine makes this process super fast. You can also do this by hand and get the exact same results. It just takes a little bit longer. The reason we want to do this now is because our next step is to scribe the stitch line, and it's important to have nice smooth edges, otherwise your stitch line could end up a little wonky. Now I'll use my 5mm stitching chisels and punch all the holes for the stitching. It turns out with so many layers of leather, my stitching chisels didn't go all the way through. So I took the piece to the drill press and used a 1/16 drill bit to drill all the way through. This isn't going to affect the piece whatsoever. And now for what I would say is one of my favorite parts of any leather project, and that's beveling the edges. The reason I want to bevel the edges now is because I need to apply some dye, and if I apply the dye first, then bevel the edges, well, I'm going to have to go back and touch up the dye. Order of operations. Very important in leatherwork. Now it's back to the rubber gloves, and I'll finish applying dye to the rest of the piece. There we go. Now, while that's drying, I'm going to get set up and ready to stitch this. To stitch this all together, I'm using some wax-coated thread and just using a standard saddle stitch. I need pliers. It's a lot of leather to pull that little needle through. I think I decided to make a last-minute change. I got this little strap here. I think I want to stitch that on kind of like this, so that it makes almost another belt loop so that you could actually wear this horizontally as well as vertically. I think I'm going to try that out. After looking at it, I don't need to mess with it yet until I get around to the back side. So I guess we'll just keep stitching away. And I've got a whole video if you're interested in how I made this stitching pony. I'll put a link down below in the description if you're interested in building something like this. Ow. Poke myself with it. Don't worry. No band-aid required. Didn't break any skin. Once I'm done stitching, I tie the ends off using a square knot, cut away the excess thread, and lightly melt the ends to keep things from fraying. Now I've just got a little bit of cleanup to do here on the ends of these straps. We'll make sure everything's nice and flush, then we can burnish down the edges. Guess I should have burnished the edge underneath this strap. Too late now. That's what I mean about order of operations. You always got to think 4 steps ahead. There's a bunch of different things you can use to burnish the edges, but for most of my projects I keep it really simple and just use regular tap water. I am using this Cocobolo burnisher that mounts in my drill press. That makes things nice and quick, but a simple hand slicker works just as well. That's looking pretty good. The edges slicked up pretty nice. Now I think is a good time to go ahead and stitch this together to make this upper belt loop. At the same time, I'm also going to stitch in the strap that'll fold around and lock the blade in place. I'm going to kind of sandwich that right in there. If only hand stitching was actually that quick. And now for probably what is the most tricky part of this entire process, mainly because I've painted myself into a corner, so to speak. I need to punch the hole for the snap, which will be used to snap this strap into place to secure the blade. But until now, I didn't really know exactly where it was going to go. But now that everything's stitched, I know where I need to punch the hole. It's going to be a little tricky to get in there because I got to do it inside here. I think I got a plan though, and we'll be able to get it done. I thought because I'd be working inside the sheath that this process was going to be really challenging. Turns out it wasn't all that bad. My revolving punch fit right inside and I was able to punch the hole. Then I just carefully worked the rivet that secures the snap down inside the sheath, followed by the little anvil, which is used with my snap setter. It just squeezed into place. Now to get the little anvil out of there. And now I can just mark the location where I want the other half of the snap, and the process is exactly the same. Punch the hole, set the snap, and it's done. We'll seal this whole thing up with some tan coat. Tan coat's gonna lock in the dye, but it's cool because it still allows us to go ahead and oil over top of it. I don't know how that works. How do you seal it up, but you can still oil it? I don't know, but it works great. It smells awesome. Super easy to apply. We just wipe on a coat, let it tack up in only really a minute or so, and then lightly buff it out. Then we can apply a coat of oil and we'll be done. Man, this stuff smells good. That tan coat leaves a really nice finish on the leather, gives it just a little bit of a gloss. This looks really cool. And did I mention, it smells amazing? Once the tan coat's dried, it's time to just give this leather a nice coat of oil. You can use whatever your preferred oil is for leather. This time around, I'm using some Neat's Foot oil. And with that, our leather sheath is complete. There's only one thing missing. We need to add our custom knife to our custom sheath. Even without the safety strap, I don't think, even if you carried this horizontally, I don't think that blade's gonna fall out of there, but I do like the added security of the strap. This thing turned out great. I love the color. I like the contrasting stitch line on there. Overall, it just turned out awesome. I'm super happy with the way this thing turned out. I think this knife, as well as the new sheath, is gonna work out great for all kinds of duties. Camping, maybe some EDC, I don't know what all, but it looks cool and nice and durable. It's gonna work out great. I hope you all enjoyed this little leatherworking project. I know I did. I really enjoy leatherworking, coming up with different things. It's such a cool material to work with. If you've never tried any sort of leather work, I highly recommend maybe getting a couple pieces of leather and just playing around, have some fun. It's really fun and it smells great too. Something about that smell of leather. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching, everyone. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time.